Have you ever felt like you're constantly torn between two choices, unable to fully commit to one path because part of you still longs for the other? Maybe you're stuck between chasing success and embracing a peaceful life. Maybe you crave deep love and intimacy, but also fear losing your independence. Or perhaps you've worked tirelessly to achieve a goal, only to find yourself feeling unfulfilled. If any of this sounds familiar, then you're not alone. In fact, this struggle is not just part of life, it is life. And no philosopher understood this better than Julius Bonson, the forgotten thinker who revealed the unsettling truth that human existence is defined by contradictions that can never be resolved. Unlike philosophers who sought order in chaos, who promised progress, enlightenment, or ultimate meaning, Bonson stripped away the comforting illusions and told us the raw, unfiltered reality. You will always want more than one thing, and no choice you make will ever fully satisfy you. But instead of seeing this as a tragedy, he believed that understanding it could change the way we approach our struggles, our ambitions, and even our happiness. And today, in a world overflowing with choices, opportunities, and conflicting desires, his philosophy is more relevant than ever. So before you make another big life decision, before you spend another night agonizing over what-ifs, I invite you to dive into the philosophy that shatters the illusion of certainty and might just set you free in the process. But first, if you're new here, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the ideas that shape our lives. And if you find value in what we do, consider supporting the channel through the super thanks button or by sharing this video with others who need to hear this message. Now, let's get into it. Julius Bonson's philosophy stands as an anomaly in the grand history of Western thought. While the intellectual legacy of figures like Kant, Hegel, and Nietzsche has shaped entire fields of philosophy, Bonson remains a relatively obscure name, buried beneath the weight of history. Yet his ideas are remarkably prescient, foreshadowing existentialism and modern psychological theories about human contradiction. His central thesis that reality is fundamentally composed of irreconcilable contradictions challenges the optimistic rationalism of traditional German idealism. Unlike Hegel, who saw contradiction as a mechanism that propels historical and intellectual progress through dialectical synthesis, Bonson argued that contradiction is not a stepping stone toward resolution, but rather an inescapable feature of reality itself. His view of human existence was not just pessimistic, but profoundly tragic. Humans are torn between opposing desires, fated to struggle against themselves in an endless internal conflict. Bonson was deeply influenced by Arthur Schopenhauer, particularly his concept of the will as the driving force behind all existence. However, he rejected Schopenhauer's belief in a singular, unified will and instead proposed that the will itself is inherently divided. In this sense, Bonson's theory of the will was not only a refinement of Schopenhauer's ideas, but a radical departure from them. Rather than viewing suffering as a byproduct of desire that can be mitigated through asceticism, Bonson saw suffering as inevitable because human beings are internally fractured. Every choice we make is overshadowed by the competing desires we suppress, leading to a form of existential paralysis. This idea is particularly relevant in modern psychology, where the concept of cognitive dissonance describes the discomfort people experience when they hold conflicting beliefs or values. One of the most relatable examples of Bonson's philosophy in everyday life is the experience of making a life-changing decision. Consider a person contemplating whether to leave a stable but unfulfilling job to pursue their true passion. On one hand, they yearn for creative freedom and personal fulfillment. On the other, they fear financial insecurity and societal judgment. This conflict is not just an external dilemma, but an internal war between different aspects of the self. According to Bonson, there is no ultimate resolution whichever choice the individual makes. A part of them will remain unfulfilled, haunted by the path not taken. This perspective directly challenges conventional self-help ideologies that promote the idea of finding one's true path or perfect choice. For Bonson, such a notion is an illusion. The human condition is defined by contradictions that cannot be neatly reconciled, only endured. Another way to understand Bonson's ideas is through the lens of relationships. Romantic love, for instance, often involves a struggle between intimacy and autonomy. People crave deep emotional connections, yet they also fear losing their sense of self in the process. This paradox plays out in countless relationships, where one partner may desire closeness while the other values independence. No amount of communication or compromise can fully resolve this tension, because it is not a problem that stems from misunderstanding, but rather from the fundamental nature of human desires. Bonson would argue that trying to fix such contradictions is futile. Instead, individuals must recognize that the duality of their needs is intrinsic to existence itself. Bonson's critique of Kant and Hegel is particularly striking in the way he dismantles their attempts to impose logical order on human experience. Kant believed that reason could provide a structured framework for understanding morality, arguing that ethical actions should be guided by universal principles. Bonson, however, saw morality as yet another realm dominated by contradiction. People are often caught between ethical duties and personal inclinations, with no clear resolution that satisfies both. The classic ethical dilemma of whether to tell a painful truth or a comforting lie illustrates this point well. According to Kantian ethics, one should always tell the truth, as lying would undermine a universal moral law. But from Bonson's perspective, such rigid principles ignore the real nature of human existence, an existence filled with competing values that resist being reduced to a single moral formula. Hegel, on the other hand, envisioned history as a dialectical process in which contradictions lead to progress. In Hegel's view, every thesis encounters an antithesis, and their clash produces a synthesis that transcends them both. Bonson outright rejected this optimism, arguing that contradictions do not resolve themselves through historical progression. Rather, they persist indefinitely. This rejection of teleological progress places Bonson closer to existentialist thinkers like Nietzsche and Sartre, who similarly denied that history moves toward a predetermined end. Instead of seeing human struggle as a means to an eventual harmonious conclusion, Bonson saw it as a perpetual condition. This perspective has significant implications for how we view personal growth and self-improvement. Many self-development philosophies assume that through introspection and discipline, individuals can resolve their internal contradictions and achieve a state of balance or fulfillment. Bonson, however, would contend that this goal is unattainable. The process of self-improvement is not about eliminating contradiction, but about learning to navigate it. A person may strive to be more disciplined, yet remain drawn to spontaneity. They may wish to be independent while craving support from others. These contradictions are not obstacles to be overcome, but essential components of human nature. In today's world, where people are bombarded with choices and encouraged to optimize every aspect of their lives, Bonson's philosophy offers a sobering counterpoint. Modern culture often promotes the idea that if one makes the right choices, they can live without regret or conflict. Social media exacerbates this by showcasing curated versions of life where others appear to have everything figured out. Bonson's view reminds us that internal struggle is not a sign of failure, but an inherent part of being human. No matter what path one takes, there will always be trade-offs, doubts, and unrealized possibilities. Perhaps the most striking aspect of Bonson's thought is its profound realism. Unlike many idealist philosophers who sought to impose order onto existence, he accepted chaos and contradiction as fundamental. This perspective can be liberating in its own way. It releases individuals from the pressure of seeking absolute certainty or resolution. If contradictions are inevitable, then struggling with them does not mean one is lost or broken. It means one is alive. A powerful example of Bonson's philosophy in action can be seen in the creative process. Artists, writers, and musicians often describe their work as a battle between conflicting impulses, the desire for perfection versus the need to express something raw and unfiltered. The pull of tradition versus the urge to innovate. Many great works of art emerge not from resolving these tensions, but from embracing them. Bob Dylan's music, for example, constantly oscillates between folk tradition and radical reinvention. Vincent van Gogh's paintings are torn between structure and chaos. These contradictions do not hinder creativity, but fuel it. Bonson's relevance extends beyond philosophy into fields like psychology and neuroscience. The study of human behavior increasingly acknowledges that people are not unified entities, but complex systems composed of competing drives. Freud's concept of the ID, ego, and superego reflects a similar understanding of internal conflict, where desires, social norms, and rationality pull the individual in different directions. More recently, cognitive science has explored the phenomenon of multiple selves within the human brain, different neural circuits that activate in response to different situations, sometimes leading to conflicting emotions and decisions. Bonson's insight that contradiction is inherent rather than pathological aligns closely with these contemporary findings. While Bonson did not gain widespread recognition in his lifetime, his ideas continue to resonate in subtle ways. His rejection of absolute knowledge, his critique of moral absolutism, and his recognition of existential contradiction all prefigure key elements of 20th century existentialism and postmodern thought. If Schopenhauer was the bridge between Kant and Nietzsche, then Bonson was the hidden pathway leading from pessimism to existentialism. His work challenges us to accept the contradictions within ourselves and to stop seeking ultimate resolution where none exists. Understanding Bonson's philosophy means embracing the idea that life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a paradox to be experienced. His legacy is a testament to the enduring power of intellectual honesty, the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths rather than seeking comfort in illusions of coherence. In a world that constantly pushes us towards certainty, Bonson's embrace of contradiction offers an alternative. A philosophy that does not promise answers, but instead provides the courage to live with the questions. Julius Bahnsen's early intellectual development was shaped by the tension between two dominant schools of German philosophy, Hegelian idealism and Schopenhauer's pessimism. Born in 1830 in Tonder, a region that changed hands between Denmark and Germany, Bahnsen grew up in a time of political and philosophical upheaval. From an early age, he exhibited a sharp, analytical mind and a fascination with existential questions. While many young thinkers of his era found themselves drawn to the grand, systematic vision of Hegel or the radical negation of Schopenhauer, Bonson would ultimately carve out his own path by rejecting both their assumptions. Kant's influence on German philosophy was impossible to ignore. By establishing the limits of human reason and arguing that we can never access the thing in itself, Kant had shifted philosophical focus inward towards the mechanisms of the mind itself. Hegel took this further by developing a historical and dialectical system in which contradictions resolve themselves through a process of synthesis. His famous dialectic thesis, Antithesis. Synthesis was meant to show that history and human thought progressed through overcoming conflicts and contradictions, reaching ever higher levels of understanding. Bonson was exposed to this kind of thinking early on as it dominated German universities and intellectual circles. The idea that all contradictions would eventually lead to progress was, at first glance, reassuring. It suggested that suffering, disorder, and intellectual uncertainty were all part of a larger system that would eventually harmonize itself. Many of Hegel's followers, particularly those who embraced a political interpretation of his ideas, saw history as moving inevitably toward a more rational and just society. However, this optimism did not sit well with Bonson. who saw contradictions not as temporary roadblocks to be resolved, but as fundamental and permanent features of reality. Schopenhauer, on the other hand, provided a starkly different vision of existence. Instead of an orderly dialectical system moving towards higher understanding, Schopenhauer proposed that life was dominated by blind, irrational will of force that drives all living things, compelling them to seek desires that can never be fully satisfied. According to Schopenhauer, suffering was inescapable because desire itself was an endless cycle. As soon as one goal is achieved, another emerges, ensuring perpetual dissatisfaction. The only escape, he argued, was through aesthetic contemplation, asceticism, or a form of resignation akin to Buddhist detachment. Bonson found Schopenhauer's critique of optimism compelling, but he was also dissatisfied with its conclusions. Schopenhauer's resignation suggested that suffering could be mitigated through renunciation of desire, but Bonson was skeptical of this solution. If will was the fundamental force of existence, then suppressing it was not truly possible. Even in the act of renouncing desires, new desires emerge, such as the desire to avoid suffering itself. Rather than seeing will as a single, unified force, Bonson began to develop the idea that will was inherently contradictory. This realization was the first major departure in his thinking. He saw Schopenhauer's concept of will not as a singular drive pushing all things in the same direction, but as something internally divided. People do not simply want, they want multiple, conflicting things at the same time. Someone may crave freedom, but also security. They may desire success, but fear the responsibilities that come with it. They may want to be loved, but also fear vulnerability. Instead of a clear path toward fulfillment, human existence was a battleground of competing desires that could never be fully reconciled. To illustrate this, consider a modern-day example: the life of a successful professional. Imagine someone who has dedicated their entire life to climbing the corporate ladder, only to reach the top and realize they are deeply unfulfilled. They sacrificed relationships, personal passions, and leisure in pursuit of their career, believing that success would bring happiness. But upon achieving their goal, they feel empty. At the same time, they know that if they were to abandon their position and pursue a simpler life, they would regret walking away from everything they worked so hard for. This is not a simple case of making the wrong decision. It is an expression of the fundamental contradictions that define human life. No matter what choice they make, part of them will remain unsatisfied. Hegel's dialectic would suggest that such a contradiction could be overcome through synthesis, that the individual would eventually find a higher resolution to their conflicting desires. But Bonson saw no such resolution. The contradiction was not a problem to be solved, but an essential feature of existence itself. The same principle applies to relationships. A person may love their partner, but feel suffocated by commitment. They may desire independence, but also long for companionship. These opposing forces do not cancel each other out, nor do they resolve into a neat synthesis. Instead, they persist indefinitely, pulling the individual in different directions. Bonson's view of contradiction went beyond just human psychology. It extended to the very fabric of reality. While Hegel and Kant sought to construct philosophical systems that made the world intelligible and rational, Bonson saw those efforts as futile. The world was not a rational structure moving toward greater understanding, but a chaotic interplay of forces that would always be at odds with each other. There was no grand historical progression, no ultimate resolution, no cosmic justice waiting at the end of history. This perspective was profoundly radical. It made Bonson something of an outsider. While other philosophers sought meaning in reason, history, or transcendence, Bonson insisted that meaning itself was fractured. The best one could do was to acknowledge these contradictions and learn to live with them rather than resist them. To see how this plays out in modern society, look at the tension between individual freedom and social responsibility. In democratic societies, people value their autonomy and personal rights. At the same time, They recognize that in order to function as a society, certain restrictions and collective obligations must exist. These two forces, personal freedom and communal duty, are constantly in conflict. Some believe that society should prioritize individual rights at all costs, while others argue that the collective good must come first. But neither position can ever fully win out because the contradiction between them is built into the very structure of human coexistence. Another way to understand Bonson's ideas is through the phenomenon of self-doubt. Many people struggle with conflicting identities, wanting to be both strong and vulnerable, both independent and connected, both ambitious and content. The notion that we should find ourselves or be true to ourselves assumes that there is a single, coherent identity waiting to be discovered. But Bonson would argue that this is an illusion. The self is not a unified entity, but a collection of competing impulses that can never fully align. People often try to suppress or resolve these contradictions, believing that they are signs of personal failure. In reality, they are simply expressions of the fundamental nature of existence. In many ways, Bonson was a precursor to existentialist thought. Jean-Paul Sartre's notion of radical freedom, the idea that humans are condemned to create their own meaning in an indifferent universe, echoes Bonson's rejection of historical and moral absolutes. Albert Camus' concept of the absurd, which suggests that life has no inherent meaning, yet humans continue to seek it anyway, resonates with Bonson's recognition of contradiction as an inescapable condition. Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence, that one must affirm life despite its inherent suffering, also shares thematic similarities with Bonson's worldview. Despite his intellectual contributions, Bonson remains largely unknown outside of academic circles. One reason for this is that his philosophy does not offer easy solutions. Whereas other thinkers provide frameworks for understanding and overcoming existential dilemmas, Bonson does not. He does not promise progress, enlightenment, or transcendence. Instead, he presents the stark reality that contradiction is inescapable and that the best one can do is embrace it rather than resist it. This lack of resolution makes his work difficult to digest, especially for those who seek answers rather than questions, or discover their true selves. Bonson's philosophy serves as a reminder that conflict, doubt, and contradiction are not signs of failure, but inherent aspects of life. The pursuit of a perfect, harmonious existence is a myth. What remains is the struggle, and perhaps, in that struggle, a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. Bonson's concept of the divided Willensweiheit is one of the most radical departures from traditional metaphysical and existential thought. While Schopenhauer viewed the will as a singular, all-encompassing force driving human desire and suffering, Bonson saw the will as inherently fractured. This meant that human beings were not simply driven by an unchanging, monolithic urge, but rather by multiple, often contradictory impulses. The result was a state of perpetual internal conflict where every choice is shadowed by an opposing desire, ensuring that no decision ever leads to complete satisfaction. To understand this, consider an everyday scenario, a person deciding whether to leave a stable job to pursue their dream career. On one hand, they feel a deep pull towards self-fulfillment, creative expression, and autonomy. On the other, they fear financial instability, the loss of social status, and the uncertainty that comes with risk. This is not just a practical dilemma. It is an existential condition. Bonson would argue that even if the person chooses one path over the other, they will still feel the weight of the road not taken. If they stay in their job, they may resent the routine and feel unfulfilled. If they leave, they may feel anxious about an unpredictable future. The problem is not that they made the wrong choice, but that human desire is structured in a way that makes complete satisfaction impossible. This idea is a direct challenge to philosophical systems that claim human contradictions can be resolved. Hegel's dialectic suggests that contradictions ultimately give way to synthesis. leading to a higher level of understanding and resolution. Freud's psychoanalytic model posits that unconscious conflicts can be made conscious and managed. Self-help ideologies argue that people can find their true path if they think clearly and decisively enough. Bonson rejects all of these notions, claiming instead that contradiction is a fundamental, inescapable feature of the human condition. The idea that we can reconcile our competing desires into a coherent, harmonious whole is, in his view, an illusion. Romantic relationships provide another clear example of Bonson's divided will. A person might crave deep emotional intimacy and commitment, yet simultaneously feel a powerful need for independence and personal space. They may want to be with someone while fearing the loss of freedom that comes with long-term relationships. This push and pull dynamic is often misinterpreted as indecisiveness or immaturity, but Bonson would argue that it is simply the way human beings are wired. There is no final answer, no perfect relationship that will eliminate this contradiction. Every relationship will always exist in a state of tension between connection and autonomy, devotion and self-preservation. Another place this concept emerges is in modern consumer culture. People are constantly bombarded with messages that they should strive for more success, more money, more status, yet they also hear that happiness lies in simplicity, in mindfulness, in being content with what they have. The very structure of capitalist economies depends on this contradiction. Advertisers play on people's conflicting desires, making them feel both unsatisfied with their current state and hopeful that the next purchase, achievement, or lifestyle change will bring fulfillment. But, as Bonson would argue, this fulfillment never arrives because satisfaction itself is inherently unstable. Even when people attain what they think they desire, new desires emerge, and new contradictions arise. This can also be seen in personal identity. People often struggle with the need to fit in versus the need to stand out. On one hand, humans are social creatures who seek belonging and validation from their communities. On the other, they want to be unique, to be recognized for their individuality, to resist conformity. These opposing drives manifest in everything from fashion choices to career ambitions to political beliefs. A person may spend years cultivating an image of rebellion and nonconformity, only to realize they crave acceptance and approval. Another may dedicate themselves to fitting in, only to feel stifled by the very norms they worked so hard to adhere to. There is no final resolution to this conflict. Both needs will always exist simultaneously. Bonson's philosophy suggests that instead of trying to eliminate contradiction, people should learn to live with it, rather than searching for a final, unshakable sense of purpose. Individuals should recognize that feelings of uncertainty and inner conflict are not obstacles to be overcome, but essential features of being human. This view contrasts sharply with more optimistic existentialist thinkers like Sartre, who argued that people could create their own meaning through radical freedom. While Sartre saw existential choice as an opportunity, Bonson saw it as a burden. The very act of choosing inevitably involves giving up an alternative, ensuring that no choice is ever entirely satisfactory. One of the most striking illustrations of this is found in parenthood. Many people desire to have children, seeing it as a way to create meaning, love, and legacy. At the same time, they may fear the loss of personal freedom, the immense responsibility, and the irreversible nature of the decision. Parents often experience both profound joy and deep regret, simultaneously loving their children while missing their past autonomy. Society tends to pressure people to see these feelings in black and white, as if they must either fully embrace or fully reject their choices. But Bonson's Divided will suggest that such contradictions are not signs of weakness or failure. They are inevitable. Another major consequence of Bonson's philosophy is its impact on morality. Many ethical frameworks assume that moral dilemmas can be resolved through rational analysis or adherence to principles. Kantian ethics, for example, relies on categorical imperatives, rules that must always be followed regardless of circumstance. Utilitarianism suggests that moral actions are those that lead to the greatest overall happiness. Bonson, however, would argue that moral conflicts are often irreducible. People frequently find themselves torn between competing duties. The obligation to tell the truth versus the desire to protect someone's feelings, the need to act in self-interest versus the responsibility to others, the commitment to justice versus the complexity of real-world consequences. Moral contradictions are not simply puzzles to be solved. They are built into the structure of human decision-making. Consider a doctor who must decide whether to prioritize one critically ill patient over another due to limited resources. No matter what decision they make, they will carry the weight of the alternative they could not choose. There is no purely rational solution that eliminates all moral distress, because morality itself is not a neatly ordered system. It is riddled with competing values and unresolved tensions. The entertainment industry also reflects this idea. Audiences are drawn to complex, contradictory characters because they reflect real human struggles. Walter White from Breaking Bad embodies this perfectly. He is simultaneously driven by love for his family and an insatiable hunger for power. He rationalizes his actions as necessary, but also takes clear pleasure in his dominance. Viewers find his character compelling precisely because he does not resolve neatly into good or bad. He is a walking contradiction. Similarly, Tony Stark in Iron Man is both a selfish playboy and a heroic savior, constantly oscillating between arrogance and genuine sacrifice. These characters resonate because they mirror the conflicts within real people. Even the concept of free will itself is subject to Bonson's critique. Philosophers have long debated whether humans truly have free will or whether their actions are determined by prior causes. Many theories attempt to reconcile this paradox by suggesting that free will operates within certain constraints. Bonson, however, suggests that free will is not just limited, it is fractured. People make choices, but those choices are shaped by competing desires that they can never fully harmonize. The illusion is not just that people believe they are free, but that they believe they can ever act without contradiction. Ultimately, Bonson's view of the divided will challenges every assumption about selfhood, choice, and fulfillment. It suggests that the conflicts people experience are not mere symptoms of unresolved issues, but fundamental aspects of existence. The search for certainty, closure, or a perfectly aligned identity is doomed to fail, not because individuals are incapable of finding it, but because it does not exist. Rather than seeking to eliminate contradictions, people should embrace them, recognizing that life itself is defined by tensions that will never fully resolve. In a world obsessed with clarity, balance, and definitive answers, Bonson's philosophy is a reminder that to be human is to be in conflict always. Bonson's rejection of rationalism sets him apart from many of the dominant figures in German philosophy. While Kant and Hegel sought to impose a sense of order on the world through reason and dialectical synthesis, Bonson viewed these efforts as fundamentally misguided. He believed that reality was inherently chaotic and that any attempt to impose a logical framework onto it was an illusion. This rejection of absolute reason places him in direct opposition to the rationalist tradition that dominated Western thought for centuries. Kant argued that reason allows us to construct an objective understanding of the world, even if we cannot directly access the thing in itself. His moral philosophy, based on the categorical imperative, assumes that ethical decisions can be determined through rational analysis, independent of personal desires or circumstances. Bonson found this perspective deeply flawed because it ignores the fundamental contradictions that shape human existence. People do not make decisions based on pure reason. They are driven by conflicting emotions, subconscious impulses, and situational factors that cannot be reduced to universal moral laws. The idea that morality could be dictated by an abstract, rational principle disregards the complexity and ambiguity of real-life ethical dilemmas. Hegel's dialectical method, which sees history as progressing through a series of contradictions that ultimately resolve into higher forms of understanding, was another target of Bahnsen's criticism. Hegel believed that apparent conflicts in thought and society were not permanent, but merely stepping stones toward a more advanced synthesis. In contrast, Bahnsen argued that contradictions do not resolve themselves, they persist indefinitely. He saw the world as governed by competing forces that could never be fully reconciled, making any notion of historical or intellectual progress an illusion. A perfect example of this in modern life is the debate over political ideologies. Many assume that through rational discourse, societies can resolve ideological conflicts and arrive at a stable, universally accepted system of governance. But history repeatedly shows that political conflicts do not disappear, they evolve into new forms. Capitalism and socialism, conservatism and liberalism, individual rights and collective responsibility, these contradictions are not leading toward some final synthesis where one side wins. Instead, they continue to clash, shift, and redefine themselves without ever reaching a final resolution. This aligns closely with Bahnsen's view that the world is not moving toward a higher rational order, but is instead locked in a perpetual state of tension. The same principle applies to personal decision-making. Many people struggle with the expectation that they must make logical choices in life, whether in career, relationships, or personal growth. Society teaches that if one carefully weighs the pros and cons, the right decision will become clear. But real-life decisions rarely work that way. A person may logically know that a job with a high salary and stability is the best choice, yet feel an unexplainable pull toward a more uncertain, creatively fulfilling path. Someone may recognize that ending a relationship is the rational choice, yet remain emotionally attached. These contradictions cannot be neatly solved through reason alone. Bonson would argue that searching for a purely logical solution to inherently contradictory situations is futile. Instead of seeking clarity where none exists, individuals should acknowledge and accept the disorder of human experience. Bonson's rejection of rationalism also extends to his views on scientific and philosophical attempts to explain existence. The pursuit of a grand unified theory, whether in physics, biology, or metaphysics, is based on the assumption that the universe operates according to an underlying rational structure. While science has been incredibly successful in explaining natural phenomena, it has not eliminated uncertainty or contradiction. Quantum mechanics, for example, has shown that at a fundamental level, reality does not operate according to the classical rules of logic. Light behaves as both a particle and a wave. Particles can exist in multiple states at once. Causality itself becomes uncertain. These discoveries challenge the long-standing belief that the universe follows a fully rational, deterministic order. Bonson, if alive today, would likely point to these findings as evidence that reality itself is paradoxical. Another area where Bonson's critique is particularly relevant is in artificial intelligence and decision-making algorithms. Many believe that AI, by processing vast amounts of data, can make more rational and objective decisions than humans. Yet, even the most advanced algorithms reflect the contradictions and biases of the people who create them. A self-driving car, for example, may be programmed to prioritize passenger safety, but what happens in a situation where protecting the passenger means endangering pedestrians? No matter how much data is fed into an AI system, it will still encounter moral and ethical contradictions that cannot be resolved through logic alone. This is precisely the kind of problem Bonson anticipated: the idea that contradictions are not errors in reasoning, but fundamental aspects of reality itself. Bonson's philosophy also has implications for the way people seek meaning in life. Rationalist traditions often assume that meaning can be discovered through logical reflection or adherence to structured belief systems, religious doctrines, philosophical frameworks, and self-help ideologies frequently offer structured paths to understanding one's purpose. But Bonson challenges the assumption that life has an inherent meaning that can be discovered through rational thought. He aligns more closely with existentialists like Camus, who argued that meaning is not given but must be created in the face of an indifferent universe. Unlike Camus, however, Bonson does not offer the comforting idea that one can rebel against meaninglessness by constructing personal significance. Instead, he emphasizes that even our attempts to create meaning are fraught with contradiction. A person may dedicate themselves to a cause or belief system only to later question its validity. They may construct a personal identity only to feel alienated from it over time. This is evident in the pursuit of success. Many people dedicate years to building a career, believing that professional achievement will bring fulfillment. Yet once they reach their goal, they often feel unfulfilled and immediately seek the next milestone. Others spend their youth chasing adventure and spontaneity, only to later crave stability and routine. The contradiction between ambition and contentment, between striving and acceptance, is not something that can be rationally resolved. Bonson would argue that this tension is an unavoidable part of existence. Modern psychology supports this idea. Studies on human happiness show that people consistently overestimate how much achieving specific goals will improve their long-term well-being. The arrival fallacy describes the mistaken belief that reaching a certain milestone wealth, love, status will bring lasting satisfaction. Yet, once a goal is achieved, a new desire emerges. This endless cycle aligns with Bonson's assertion that human nature itself is fractured, constantly pulled in different directions. Even the structure of storytelling reflects Bonson's ideas. Traditional narratives, especially in Western literature, follow an arc in which conflict builds toward resolution. Heroes face challenges, overcome them, and achieve closure. But many of the most compelling modern stories reject this formula. Films like No Country for Old Men or The Sopranos end without clear resolutions, leaving audiences unsettled. TV shows like Breaking Bad present characters who do not grow in a linear fashion but remain trapped in cycles of self-destruction. These stories resonate because they reflect the reality that not all contradictions can be resolved, and not all struggles lead to catharsis. Bonson's critique of rationalism ultimately forces a reevaluation of how people approach life's uncertainties. Instead of viewing contradictions as temporary obstacles that will eventually be resolved, he suggests that they are permanent conditions that must be confronted. This perspective is unsettling because it removes the comfort of believing in a rational, ordered world. But it is also liberating in that it allows people to stop searching for non-existent resolutions and instead engage more honestly with the complexities of existence. Accepting that disorder and contradiction are natural aspects of life can lead to a greater sense of resilience. Instead of constantly seeking final answers, individuals can learn to navigate uncertainty with a greater sense of awareness. Bonson's rejection of rationalism is not a call for nihilism, nor is it an argument against the use of reason itself. Rather, it is a challenge to the assumption that reason alone can provide ultimate answers. His work suggests that embracing contradiction is not a failure of thought, but an essential aspect of wisdom. Instead of clinging to the illusion that everything will eventually make sense, people can find a deeper engagement with life by acknowledging and accepting its inherent contradictions. Bonson's influence on modern philosophy is often overlooked, but his ideas resonate deeply with some of the most significant thinkers of the 19th and 20th centuries. Friedrich Nietzsche, for instance, shares many thematic similarities with Bonson, particularly in the rejection of inherent meaning and the need for individuals to define their own values. However, while Nietzsche saw this as an opportunity, arguing that human beings could embrace the chaos of existence and create their own path through the concept of the Übermensch, Bonson was far less optimistic. He did not believe in the possibility of transcendence or self-overcoming. Instead, he viewed life as a perpetual struggle where contradictions could never be fully resolved. This fundamental difference places Bonson squarely in the camp of philosophical pessimism, while Nietzsche, despite his nihilistic tendencies, ultimately sought a more empowering perspective. Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence proposes that individuals should live as if they would have to repeat their choices for eternity, embracing life's suffering and joys alike. In contrast, Bonson would argue that this is impossible because human beings are trapped in a state of internal conflict. Even if someone were to relive their life an infinite number of times, they would still face the same unresolved contradictions: the push and pull between conflicting desires, the inability to fully reconcile one's ambitions with one's limitations. This aligns Bonson more closely with thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer, who saw suffering as the inevitable result of existence itself. But whereas Schopenhauer advocated for asceticism as a way to escape suffering, Bonson rejected even that. He believed there was no way out. Existence was not something to be transcended, but endured. The existentialists of the 20th century, including Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, also reflect aspects of Bonson's philosophy. Sartre's idea of radical freedom suggests that human beings are condemned to make choices without any external guide to meaning. Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, argues that life's absurdity forces individuals to either embrace meaninglessness or succumb to despair. Bonson prefigures this existential dilemma by asserting that human existence is governed by contradictions that cannot be harmonized. However, where Sartre and Camus leave room for personal agency, suggesting that people can at least define their own purpose, Bonson offers a darker conclusion. The contradictions within human nature are not just external struggles that people can overcome through willpower. They're embedded in the very fabric of existence. Camus' Sisyphus finds meaning in the act of pushing the rock uphill despite its futility. But Bonson would argue that this effort is not a conscious rebellion, but an unavoidable torment. Bonson's ideas also have strong parallels with Sigmund Freud's theory of the psyche, particularly in the division of human desire into conflicting forces. Freud's model of the ID, ego, and superego reflects Bonson's notion of the divided will. The ID represents primal desires and impulses. The superego embodies moral and societal expectations, and the ego attempts to mediate between the two. Freud's concept of repression, the idea that people suppress parts of themselves to conform to external standards, is strikingly similar to Bonson's belief that human beings are constantly at war with their own desires. Every decision made comes at the cost of an alternative path, and no choice ever leads to complete satisfaction. This is why people experience regret, doubt, and dissatisfaction even when they achieve their goals. There's always another part of the self that remains unfulfilled. The influence of Bonson extends beyond philosophy into literature and film, particularly in narratives that explore existential despair, moral ambiguity, and psychological conflict. One of the clearest modern examples of Bonson's divided will can be found in the character of Walter White from Breaking Bad. Walter is driven by the desire to provide for his family, but also by an insatiable need for power and control. His internal contradictions make him compelling. He is neither purely good nor purely evil, but a man trapped in an endless cycle of self-destruction. Every choice he makes leads to further consequences, and instead of resolving his struggles, he only deepens them. His story does not follow the traditional arc of redemption or resolution. Rather, it exemplifies Bonson's view that contradictions do not lead to synthesis, but persist indefinitely. Another strong example is found in The Dark Knight, particularly in the character of the Joker. The Joker's entire philosophy is based on the rejection of rational order. He exists purely to expose the contradictions in human morality, demonstrating that no ethical system is stable under pressure. He forces characters like Batman and Harvey Dent into impossible dilemmas, revealing that moral contradictions are not just external issues, but fundamental aspects of human nature. In a Bonsonian sense, the Joker represents the inevitable chaos that rational systems attempt, but fail to suppress. Modern psychology also reflects Bonson's insights into the fragmented self. The idea of cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort experienced when a person holds two contradictory beliefs, mirrors Bonson's assertion that contradiction is an inherent part of human consciousness. Psychological research has shown that people will go to great lengths to reduce cognitive dissonance, often justifying their choices in ways that align with their self-image. This suggests that much of human thought is not guided by pure reason, but by an attempt to resolve or ignore contradictions that cannot actually be reconciled. For Bonson, this struggle is not an error in thinking, but an unavoidable condition of being human. In the realm of politics, Bonson's perspective is also highly relevant. Political ideologies often attempt to impose a rational order on society, but they frequently collapse under the weight of internal contradictions. The tension between freedom and security, individualism and collectivism, progress and tradition, these are not conflicts that can be permanently resolved. Every political system must constantly navigate these contradictions, and attempts to eliminate them entirely often lead to authoritarianism or societal breakdown. The ongoing debates over economic policy, civil liberties, and cultural identity all reflect Bonson's insight that human affairs are governed by competing forces that will never fully align. His critique of rationalism and progress is particularly prescient in the era of artificial intelligence and automation. Many people assume that technological advancements will lead to a more rational and efficient world. Yet these advancements often introduce new contradictions. AI systems designed to optimize decision-making frequently encounter ethical dilemmas that cannot be reduced to simple calculations. Self-driving cars must make split-second choices about who to protect in an accident. Algorithms used in criminal justice systems reflect societal biases even as they claim to be objective. The dream of a purely rational society remains elusive because human existence itself is defined by tensions that cannot be programmed away, even in the way people pursue happiness. Bonson's philosophy finds echoes. The self-help industry promotes the idea that by following a set of rational principles, goal setting, mindfulness, positive thinking, individuals can find fulfillment. Yet studies repeatedly show that happiness is not a fixed destination, but a fluctuating state, constantly shaped by new desires and shifting priorities. People chase career success only to find themselves longing for simplicity. They seek relationships only to crave independence. The very notion of life balance assumes that contradictions can be managed, but Bonson would argue that they can never be fully harmonized. Bonson's influence may not be as widely acknowledged as that of Nietzsche or Sartre, but his ideas continue to shape how people understand conflict, identity, and meaning. His rejection of rationalism, his emphasis on the persistence of contradiction, and his critique of historical progress all resonate in contemporary thought. Whether in psychology, politics, literature, or personal decision-making, his insights remain profoundly relevant. He challenges the comforting illusion that contradictions can be eliminated, urging people instead to confront and accept the disorder at the heart of existence. In a world that constantly seeks clear answers and definitive resolutions, Bonson's work serves as a powerful reminder that to be human is to be caught between opposing forces, navigating an existence that will never fully make sense. Tom's struggle is emblematic of the human condition as Julius Bahnsen described it. He is trapped between two opposing forces, each equally compelling, yet ultimately irreconcilable. On one hand, his successful career provides him with financial security, social status, and a sense of accomplishment. On the other, he feels a deep, nagging dissatisfaction, as if he has sacrificed his true passions in pursuit of external success. Every day, he oscillates between these two realities, unable to fully commit to either. If he stays in his job, He will always wonder what could have been if he had pursued his dream. If he leaves, he will have to confront financial insecurity, judgment from peers, and the fear that his passion may not be enough to sustain him. This is precisely what Bonson meant when he argued that human existence is defined by contradictions that cannot be resolved. Tom is not unique in this struggle. His dilemma reflects a universal theme that plays out in countless ways. Consider the artist who longs to create meaningful work but also craves commercial success. If they follow their artistic vision without compromise, they may struggle financially and remain unrecognized. If they cater to market demands, they risk losing their authenticity and feeling like a sellout. No matter which path they choose, they will always feel a sense of loss, an awareness that something has been sacrificed. There is no perfect balance, no synthesis that will eliminate the tension between these opposing desires. Relationships often reflect this same contradiction. A person may deeply love their partner, yet feel restless, craving excitement or independence. They may fear commitment while also fearing loneliness. This internal conflict can create endless cycles of dissatisfaction, where no relationship ever feels entirely right. Some people move from one relationship to another, believing that the next person will finally provide what was missing. Others stay in unfulfilling relationships out of fear of the unknown. Either way, the contradiction remains. It is not something that can be fixed, only endured. The same dynamic appears in parenting. Many parents struggle with the dual desire to give their children everything while also maintaining their own identity and aspirations. They want to be present, involved, and nurturing, yet they also crave personal freedom, career success, and time for themselves. No matter what they do, they feel they are failing in some way. Either they are neglecting their children or sacrificing their own ambitions. Society often pressures people to believe that they can have it all if they just manage their time correctly. But Bonson would argue that this is an illusion. The contradiction is not a logistical problem to be solved, but an existential reality. Another common example is the tension between ambition and contentment. People are often told that they should strive for success, push themselves beyond their limits, and never settle. At the same time, they are encouraged to practice mindfulness, gratitude, and appreciate the present moment. These two messages directly contradict each other. If someone constantly strives for more, they may never truly feel satisfied. If they try to embrace contentment, they may feel stagnant or unfulfilled. There is no single answer that eliminates the contradiction. Any choice will always leave something unfulfilled, even at a societal level. Contradictions persist in ways that reflect Bonson's philosophy. Take the debate over work-life balance. Companies encourage employees to be ambitious and dedicated, yet also emphasize the importance of mental health and personal well-being. The reality is that excelling in a demanding career often requires sacrifices that contradict the idea of balance. Many professionals feel the pressure to be constantly available, always performing at a high level, even while being told to take care of themselves. The result is an endless cycle of stress, guilt, and exhaustion. No matter which priority one chooses, the opposing force never disappears. Politics is another arena where Bonson's concept of unresolved contradictions plays out. People often believe in both personal freedom and societal responsibility, but these values frequently come into conflict. A government that prioritizes individual liberty may struggle to provide social safety nets, while one that emphasizes collective well-being may impose restrictions that limit personal choice. The contradiction between freedom and order, progress and tradition, security and privacy, these are not debates that will ever be fully settled. They are fundamental tensions built into the structure of human societies. In personal identity, people also experience this same fractured nature. A person may take pride in their heritage and traditions while also feeling constrained by them. They may want to be unique and stand out, yet also crave acceptance and belonging. Social media intensifies this contradiction, as people curate idealized versions of themselves while privately struggling with insecurity. The pressure to be authentic while also maintaining a perfect image creates an endless loop of self-doubt. The more one tries to resolve the contradiction, the more deeply entrenched it becomes. Bonson's perspective can even be applied to decision-making in everyday life. Many people agonize over choices, believing that if they analyze a situation thoroughly enough, they will find the right answer. But often, the real reason decisions feel difficult is that they involve competing values that cannot be fully reconciled. A young adult deciding whether to move to a new city faces a trade-off between adventure and stability, opportunity and familiarity. No amount of rational analysis can eliminate the emotional weight of leaving behind friends and family or the fear of missing out on new experiences. The contradiction is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be faced. The idea that contradictions persist indefinitely can be uncomfortable. Many people want to believe that with the right mindset, strategy, or effort, they can resolve their internal conflicts and reach a state of clarity. Bonson's philosophy challenges this assumption, arguing that contradiction is not a temporary obstacle, but an intrinsic part of human existence. This does not mean that people should stop making decisions or striving for what they want. Instead, it suggests that they should abandon the illusion that any choice will provide complete fulfillment. Every decision comes with trade-offs, and every path not taken remains a shadow in the background. This understanding can be both unsettling and liberating. It removes the pressure to find the perfect job, relationship, or life path, instead of chasing a non-existent state of total satisfaction. People can accept the contradictions within themselves and learn to navigate them with greater awareness. Tom, the businessman struggling between security and passion, may never find a perfect solution, but he can stop tormenting himself with the idea that one exists. He can recognize that both options carry inherent contradictions and that no matter what he chooses, part of him will still feel the pull of the alternative. This acceptance does not eliminate the conflict, but makes it easier to live with. Understanding Bonson's view on contradiction also helps explain why people often feel restless even after achieving their goals. Many believe that reaching a certain milestone, earning a degree, getting a promotion, buying a house will provide lasting satisfaction. But as soon as one goal is reached, a new one emerges. This is not simply a cultural phenomenon, but a fundamental feature of human psychology. The mind is always looking forward, always aware of what could have been, always questioning whether a different choice would have led to greater happiness. Even in leisure and entertainment, people experience Bonson's divided will. A person may plan a vacation expecting to relax, yet find themselves anxious about missing work. They may finally get time off only to feel restless and unproductive. The contradiction between the need for rest and the desire for achievement is never fully resolved. Similarly, in social situations, people may crave solitude while also feeling lonely when alone. The cycle repeats endlessly, reinforcing the idea that human desires are not meant to be fully aligned. Bonson's philosophy is not meant to encourage despair, but rather to shift how people understand their own struggles. Instead of feeling trapped by indecision or dissatisfaction, people can recognize that these experiences are natural and unavoidable. The belief that happiness comes from eliminating contradictions is an illusion. Real peace comes from learning to exist within them, making choices with the understanding that no decision will ever feel entirely complete. Tom's story is not unique. It is the story of everyone who has ever felt torn between competing desires, who has ever questioned whether they made the right choice, who has ever longed for something while fearing its consequences. The contradictions will never go away, but accepting their permanence allows people to move forward without being paralyzed by the search for an impossible resolution. In a world where people are constantly bombarded with choices, the relevance of Bonson's philosophy has only grown stronger. The modern individual faces an overwhelming number of decisions, each one carrying its own contradictions and trade-offs. Should one dedicate themselves fully to a career, striving for success and financial security, or prioritize family and personal relationships? Should they take the safe and stable path, or risk everything in pursuit of a dream? Should they conform to societal expectations, seeking approval and belonging, or reject conventional norms and forge their own path? These are not problems with definitive answers, because no matter which choice is made, a lingering sense of loss remains. Every decision eliminates other possibilities, and with them, an alternative version of oneself that will never be realized. This phenomenon is particularly evident in the career versus personal life dilemma. Many professionals struggle with the feeling that they must choose between professional success and meaningful personal relationships. Someone who pours all their energy into climbing the corporate ladder may find themselves financially secure but emotionally disconnected, while someone who prioritizes personal fulfillment may later regret not achieving their full potential in their field. Society often promotes the idea that a perfect work-life balance is attainable if one just manages their time correctly, but Bonson would argue that this is an illusion. The contradiction is not logistical but existential. No amount of planning or optimization can eliminate the fact that time spent on one pursuit is time taken away from another. Social media exacerbates this issue by constantly presenting curated glimpses into the lives of others, making people feel that they are always missing out on something better. A person sees a friend traveling the world and feels trapped in their stable but monotonous routine. Yet someone else sees their job stability and feels insecure about their lack of financial security. The illusion that others have figured out that somewhere there exists a perfect balance only increases dissatisfaction. Bonson's philosophy reminds us that this dissatisfaction is not a sign of failure, but a natural consequence of human existence. The desire to be both financially successful and free-spirited, both committed and independent, both ambitious and content, these contradictions cannot be solved, only navigated. The same contradictions appear in relationships. A person may crave deep intimacy, yet fear losing their independence. They may want to settle down, but also feel restless and uncertain. Some people bounce from relationship to relationship, hoping to find the perfect partner who will somehow resolve these contradictions. Others stay in relationships that feel incomplete, afraid of the unknown that comes with leaving. The myth of the one fuels this cycle, promoting the idea that if a person chooses correctly, they will find a partner who satisfies all their emotional needs. But in reality, every relationship requires trade-offs. No partner can simultaneously provide both complete security and unrestrained freedom, both excitement and stability. The longing for a perfect relationship is not a flaw in judgment, but a manifestation of the divided will Bonson describes. Parenting is another realm where Bonson's ideas find relevance. Modern parents often feel caught between the pressure to provide the best opportunities for their children and the guilt of not spending enough time with them. They want to nurture and protect their children while also encouraging their independence. They desire to be both role models and friends, both disciplinarians and supportive allies. The contradiction is unavoidable, and no parenting philosophy can eliminate it. Every choice, whether to prioritize career advancement to secure a better future for one's children or to sacrifice career ambitions to be more present, comes with its own regrets. This is why so many parents experience persistent anxiety, feeling that no matter what they do, they're failing in some way. Bonson's philosophy also helps explain why people often feel unfulfilled even after achieving what they thought they wanted. Society promotes the idea that happiness is a destination, that once a person attains a certain level of success, financial security, or personal fulfillment, they will finally feel satisfied. Yet, studies in psychology show that people consistently overestimate how much happiness they will feel after reaching a goal. The arrival fallacy describes the tendency to believe that achieving a specific milestone, whether it's getting a promotion, buying a house, or finding the perfect partner, will bring lasting fulfillment. But once the goal is reached, a new desire emerges. This endless cycle aligns with Bonson's assertion that human nature itself is fractured, constantly pulled in different directions. Politics and social issues further illustrate the contradictions Bonson described. Many people believe in both individual freedom and societal responsibility. Yet these values frequently come into conflict. A government that prioritizes personal liberties may struggle to provide collective security, while one that emphasizes the common good may impose restrictions that limit individual autonomy. The debates over privacy versus safety, tradition versus progress, capitalism versus socialism, these are not conflicts that can ever be fully resolved. Every policy decision, every ideological stance involve a trade-off, leaving some values prioritized at the expense of others. The frustration people feel with politics, the sense that no leader or system ever delivers on all promises, stems from the fundamental reality that no system can perfectly satisfy every competing value. Technology introduces new contradictions that Bonson's philosophy helps illuminate. People want convenience but also privacy. They enjoy the benefits of artificial intelligence and automation, but fear the loss of jobs and human connection. The rise of social media allows for greater connectivity, but also contributes to increased feelings of isolation. The dream of a perfectly efficient, rational society where technology eliminates human suffering and maximizes well-being remains elusive because technological progress itself generates new contradictions. For every problem solved, new ones arise, reinforcing Bonson's view that contradiction is an inescapable feature of existence. Even in entertainment, Bonson's ideas can be seen in the appeal of morally complex characters. Audiences are drawn to figures like Walter White from Breaking Bad, who embodies conflicting motivations: love for his family and a thirst for power. Tony Stark in Iron Man is a genius inventor who wants to protect the world, but also craves personal glory. These characters resonate because they reflect the contradictions within all people. Stories that offer simple moral resolutions often feel unsatisfying because they do not reflect the reality that human nature is filled with competing desires. The notion that contradictions must be resolved is deeply embedded in Western thought, but Bonson's work challenges this assumption. Many self-help ideologies promote the idea that by following a certain mindset or strategy, people can eliminate inner conflicts and achieve lasting peace. But Bonson suggests that this is an illusion. No career choice, no relationship, no lifestyle decision will ever eliminate the fundamental tensions within human existence. The key is not to search for a non-existent resolution, but to learn how to live with contradiction. This does not mean that people should become passive or indifferent. Instead, it means embracing the fact that every choice involves trade-offs and that feeling conflicted is not a failure, but an inherent part of life. A person may never feel 100% certain about a major decision, but that does not mean they're making the wrong one. They may always wonder about the path not taken, but that does not mean they should not commit to the path they are on. Bonson's ideas provide a counterbalance to the modern obsession with certainty, control, and optimization. In a world where people are constantly seeking the perfect answer, the perfect lifestyle, the perfect identity, his philosophy serves as a reminder that imperfection and contradiction are inevitable. Rather than resisting this reality, individuals can learn to navigate it with awareness and acceptance. Understanding this can be liberating. It means people can stop torturing themselves over decisions, stop believing that they are failing just because they feel uncertain or conflicted. The contradictions will never disappear, but that does not mean life cannot be meaningful. Meaning does not come from eliminating contradiction, but from engaging with it, making choices despite the uncertainty, and accepting that no matter what path one takes, there will always be another path left behind. Bonson's ideas may not have received widespread recognition, but their relevance in today's world is undeniable. Life is not a straight path leading to perfect understanding or harmony. It is a constant interplay of contradictions that can never be fully resolved, instead of seeking a final answer to our internal struggles. We must recognize that these struggles are an inherent part of existence. Rather than resisting the discomfort of contradiction, we can learn to navigate it, understanding that every choice carries both fulfillment and regret. Every victory comes with its own costs, and every dream achieved leaves behind an alternative reality that will never be. People often operate under the assumption that with enough effort, wisdom, or planning, they can resolve the conflicts within themselves. Society reinforces this illusion by offering countless strategies for achieving balance, whether in work and personal life, ambition and contentment, independence and belonging. But no matter how much a person tries to optimize their existence, the fundamental contradictions of life remain. This is why even those who appear to have it all still feel moments of doubt, longing, or dissatisfaction. No amount of success can eliminate the feeling that something else might have been possible. No amount of self-reflection can erase the tension between competing desires. Consider the person who spends their youth chasing adventure, convinced that settling down would be a form of surrender. As they age, they begin to long for stability, for a place to call home, for deep and lasting relationships. But someone who chose the opposite path, who built a stable life early on, may look at those who travel the world and feel that they missed out. Neither choice is wrong, yet neither is entirely satisfying. There is no solution to this contradiction, no way to experience both possibilities fully. One must live with the reality of the choice they made while acknowledging the shadow of the path they did not take. This plays out in every aspect of life. A person who values security and routine may, at times, feel suffocated by predictability, yearning for spontaneity and risk. Someone who thrives on unpredictability may occasionally crave the comfort of stability. These desires are not evidence of failure, but proof of the divided nature of human will. The same dynamic applies to relationships, career decisions, and personal identity. People often find themselves caught between wanting to belong and wanting to stand apart, between craving love and fearing vulnerability, between striving for success and yearning for peace. Every option carries contradictions, and no perfect choice exists. Bonson's philosophy serves as a counterpoint to the modern fixation on self-improvement and optimization. Many people believe that if they just find the right productivity system, the right mindset, the right work-life balance, they can eliminate uncertainty and conflict. But Bonson would argue that these contradictions are not obstacles to be overcome, but fundamental aspects of being human. The belief that peace comes from resolving all contradictions is a myth. Real peace comes from accepting that contradiction is unavoidable. Instead of trying to eliminate competing desires, people can learn to navigate them with greater awareness, understanding that uncertainty does not mean they're failing, it means they are alive. This realization can transform the way people approach decision-making. Many individuals feel paralyzed when faced with major life choices, fearing that they will make the wrong decision and live in regret. But Bonson's perspective suggests that regret is inevitable because every decision involves sacrifice. No matter what choice is made, some part of the self will always wonder about the alternative. This does not mean that choices are meaningless, only that the expectation of complete certainty or satisfaction is unrealistic. Recognizing this allows people to move forward with greater confidence, knowing that doubt does not indicate a mistake, but a natural consequence of human complexity. Modern psychology supports this view. Studies on cognitive dissonance show that people often rationalize their decisions after the fact, convincing themselves that they made the right choice even if they feel uncertain. This suggests that the mind is not designed to find a single perfect solution, but to manage contradictions as they arise. The idea that one must have everything figured out before taking action is a misconception. In reality, clarity often comes through action rather than before it. People rarely feel fully prepared for major life changes, but they move forward anyway, adjusting as they go. The expectation of absolute certainty before making a decision is paralyzing because it contradicts the very nature of how human thought works. This applies to relationships as well. Many people hesitate to commit because they fear missing out on something better. They may wonder if they are with the right person or if they should wait for someone who fulfills all their needs without any conflict. But no relationship is free of contradictions. Even in the most loving partnerships, people will experience moments of doubt, irritation, or longing for something different. Bonson's philosophy suggests that the key to a fulfilling relationship is not finding someone who eliminates all inner conflicts, but recognizing that such conflicts will always exist. Love does not resolve contradiction. It exists alongside it. The same principle applies to careers. People often believe that if they choose the right career path, they will never feel dissatisfaction. But even those in their dream jobs experience frustration, boredom, and the occasional desire to walk away. Someone who achieves great professional success may still feel a void, just as someone who prioritizes a simpler life may wonder what could have been. No matter what path is taken, there will always be a part of the self that questions it. This does not mean people should not strive for meaningful work, only that they should not expect any career to eliminate internal conflict entirely. Bonson's ideas also provide insight into the cultural obsession with happiness. Many people believe that happiness is something that can be attained permanently if they just follow the right formula. But research shows that happiness is not a fixed state, it fluctuates over time, influenced by countless internal and external factors. People often feel dissatisfied not because they're doing something wrong, but because the nature of desire itself ensures that new wants and needs will always emerge. This is why those who achieve their long-term goals often find themselves searching for new ones. The cycle of desire never ends, because human beings are wired to experience contradiction. Even the way people view personal identity reflects Bonson's divided will. Many struggle with the idea that they must have a clear, consistent sense of self, yet they also change over time. A person may define themselves in one way in their 20s and feel entirely different by their 40s. They may embrace a certain lifestyle only to later question it. This can create anxiety, as if changing means they are losing themselves. But Bonson would argue that this fluctuation is not a flaw, but a natural reflection of human nature. People are not fixed entities. They are constantly evolving, shaped by experiences, relationships, and shifting values. The expectation that one should always know exactly who they are is unrealistic because identity itself is fluid. Bonson's perspective does not offer a solution in the traditional sense. He does not suggest that contradictions can be resolved or that there is a path to ultimate clarity. Instead, he invites people to accept contradiction as an intrinsic part of life. This does not mean giving up on personal growth or ambition. It means recognizing that no achievement, no relationship, no life path will ever eliminate doubt entirely. The goal is not to eradicate inner conflict, but to learn to live with it in a way that allows for action, movement, and engagement with the world. In a culture that constantly pushes people towards certainty, whether in careers, relationships, or personal identity, Bonson's work serves as a necessary counterbalance. It reminds people that feeling conflicted does not mean they are lost or broken. It means they are human. Instead of viewing contradictions as failures, people can see them as part of the richness of existence. Every choice, every experience, every emotion contains complexity, and that complexity is what makes life meaningful. The next time you find yourself torn between competing desires, remember that there is no single correct path, no decision that will resolve all uncertainty. Instead of waiting for absolute clarity, embrace the contradictions within you and move forward anyway. What matters is not eliminating conflict, but learning to live with it. What contradictions are shaping your life right now? How do you navigate them? The key is not to search for a final answer, but to accept that the questions will always remain. So, Now that we've peeled back the layers of Bonson's unsettling yet profound philosophy, where does that leave us? Should we resign ourselves to a life of eternal dissatisfaction? Should we stop striving, stop choosing, stop dreaming? Not all. If anything, Bonson's insights should liberate us from the unrealistic expectation that one day, everything will finally make sense, that we will reach some mythical state of perfect clarity, balance, or contentment. That expectation is the very thing keeping us stuck in doubt and regret. The truth is, no matter what path you take, another part of you will always wonder about the road not taken. No relationship, no career, no life decision will ever be completely free of contradiction. And that's okay. You're not failing because you feel torn between different desires. You are not broken because you question your choices. You are simply human. The sooner we accept this, the sooner we can live without the constant weight of what ifs holding us back. So what does this mean for you right now? Maybe you're facing a major decision and feeling paralyzed by indecision. Maybe you're questioning whether you made the right choice in the past. Or maybe you're just exhausted from the pressure to have everything figured out. Let this be your permission to stop chasing a perfect answer that doesn't exist. Instead of trying to resolve your contradictions, start learning to live with them. The discomfort will always be there, but so will the freedom to choose, to act, and to move forward despite the uncertainty. And if this message resonated with you, let's keep this conversation going. Drop a comment below and tell me, what contradictions have shaped your life? How do you navigate them? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you found value in this video, don't forget to hit like, share it with someone who needs this, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Your support helps keep this channel alive. And if you want to go the extra mile, consider dropping a super thanks to help us continue bringing deep, insightful discussions to you. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep embracing the contradictions that make life so beautifully complex.